Then.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Morning, all our regular participants this morning. Elian, nice to see you. Good morning. Good morning. Nice to see you, Henry Israel, family Marsh. Very nice to see you both, always. George, morning, George. Nice to see you. Okay, so this morning, actually, I'd like to do something a little bit different, in the sense that we have been really focusing on learning Sefer Bereshis now for a few months, and I'd like to take a break today from that, because yesterday was the 20th of Mar Cheshvan, was the second yahrzeit of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who was known, I think, to all of you. I'm sure you've all heard him on some occasions and read his writings on some occasions. And I think he was a extremely influential and important person in Anglo Jewry and in world English-speaking Jewry, particularly during his lifetime. And yesterday was his second yahrzeit. And the truth is, his patira, his passing away at the young age of 72, when he was really in the prime of his life, was a tremendous shock and a blow to all of us. For me personally, he was a friend and a colleague, and we did lots of things together. We discussed lots of things together. I was always something of an admirer of his, as he sort of really chose his own unique path in the Orthodox rabbinate. He did things that nobody else did. He addressed problems that nobody else addressed, and he was really a sui generis. He was one of a kind. At the same time as being a member of the fraternity of Orthodox Rabbanim, he was also one of a kind in so many different ways. So I thought that today, maybe, I would dedicate today's shir to his memory, speak a little bit about him and a selection maybe of his Divrei Torah. Possibly lots of you have heard many of his Divrei Torah in the past, but certainly very, very well worth listening to. I mean, personally, he was, if you like, a partner for me in the building of my community in London, in Ner Yisrael, my community. He was active in the formation of the community and encouraging the community and in making it happen. And then many of you are aware that he was regular as a visiting speaker at Ner Yisrael, and his presence was much appreciated. Many of you also aware, of course, that as Chief Rabbi of England, he was very often under fierce criticism. In other words, the role of the Chief Rabbi of England is not a walk in the park. The Chief Rabbi of England, the Chief Rabbi of the UK, is almost by definition always not frum enough for the frum communities, too frum for the assimilated non-Jewish part of the world, and generally can't do everything right by everybody. So he does his best. Jonathan Sacks really chose a path for himself, which was quite unique in many ways. So I'd like to say a few things about what was special about this person and why he was really in our lifetimes, he was a star in the Anglo-Orthodox Jewish world. And interestingly, in the last years of his life, after he retired as Chief Rabbi of England, he became even more famous. He stepped off the position of Chief Rabbi and he stepped on to the world stage. He had a voice in the world on universal issues. And that's really one of the first things I'd like to say about Rabbi Sacks. I'd like to explain it a little bit with a few divrei Torah that people are maybe not so familiar with. So we have, and actually it's not unrelated to the Parshas and Bereshis that we've been learning recently. As I've said to you all along, Bereshis contains within it the seeds of all major themes and ideas in later Torah and Jewish history. But the point I'm relating to particularly is that Avraham Avinu is told two things, what Rabbi Sacks used to refer to as the universal versus the particularist aspect of Judaism. This is one of his favorite themes that he came back to time and time again. That within the Torah, there is also a universal theme. In other words, statements and ideas are made about mankind in general, not specifically Jewish. And then there is the particularist theme, the theme which relates to the uniqueness of Am Yisrael, the uniqueness of Eretz Yisrael, while at the same time acknowledging the importance of mankind in general. And it's that dynamics between what he called the particular and the universal, which made his writings unique in many ways. So Avraham Avinu, on the one hand, he's told that the land of Israel, you will become the owner of this land, and that you will become a great nation, right? And you'll become something unique. And at the same time, he's told the nivrachu v'cha kol mishpachos ha'adama. In other words, all the nations of mankind will be blessed through you. In other words, he's not told you will be unique and the rest of the world are irrelevant, or the rest of the world are your enemies, or the rest of your world doesn't matter. On the contrary, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying to Avraham Avinu, the whole of mankind matters to me. I want to bring a bracha to the whole of mankind, and I'm choosing you, Avraham, and your descendants, and the Jewish people to be the carriers of that bracha. And that's one of the amazing aspects of Jewish life, that on the one hand, Judaism is particular. Particular means it's specific to Am Yisrael, right? Shabbos and Kashrus and Yom Kippur and Bris Milah and all these things are not meant to be universal. They're not written in the Torah that they should become a code of practice for mankind. But at the same time, there are themes in the Torah which are addressing the whole of mankind, which are universal. And in particular, of course, once we move into the messianic literature of Yeshaya and Yirmiyah and Zechariah and Yechezkel, when they speak about their vision of Acharis Hayamim, of the world redeemed, then the nations of the world are all redeemed. In other words, the redemption of the Jewish people isn't a particular event. Mashiach is an event which relates to the whole of mankind, right? The pasuk that we know so well from Shul, Ki mitzion teitzei Torah, or Devar Hashem Yerushalayim. If you look it up, you'll find that it's a pasuk in Yeshaya where he's describing the Messianic era, and he's describing the way in which all the nations of the world get together, and they say, Ki mitzion teitzei Torah, or Devar Hashem Yerushalayim. They all recognize that there's some element of truth and wisdom and morality which they can benefit from the Jewish people. And that is our vision of redemption is not particular, it's universal. But without going into Mashiach at the moment, let's just speak generally about the way we learn Torah. That we learn Torah with both of these different perspectives. We learn Torah looking for that which is unique to Klal Yisrael, and then we look for that which is universal about mankind. And Rabbi Sacks took the view, so let's just put that idea on hold for a minute. I'll come back to that for a minute. there was something that he used to say quite regularly, which was an interesting observation, which not many people said. He said, we're living through an era now in the 20th century, 21st century, which has never, ever existed before in Jewish history. In what sense? He says that we have a sovereign Jewish state in the land of Israel, and we have a diaspora which is predominantly tolerant of Jewish life. So we have a prosperous and developing and growing Jewish life in the diaspora, living in a tolerant, by and large, tolerant society. And at the same time, we have a Jewish sovereign state. These two factors together have never coexisted before ever in history. And what is the result? He felt that what is the result of these two factors coming together? The result is that the nations of the world are more open to hear the wisdom of Judaism than they've ever been before. In other words, there's an appreciation. There's always anti-Semitism, of course. Anti-Semitism is a toxic and murderous force which rears its ugly head in every generation. But apart from the anti-Semites, there is a large majority of non-Jews in the diaspora who would like to hear from us. What is Judaism about? What does it mean? And what is its ideas? And what does it have to teach us? And that was really one of his most important guiding principles in all his talks, and particularly in all his writings. If you've read any of his books like Faith in the Future, or books like Morality, or books like The Great Partnership, these are some of his really majestic writings, really magnificent writings. If you want to give yourself an intellectual treat at any point, you should buy this book, which is called Morality by Rabbi Sachs, that I'm now reading for the second time, and it's just an amazing work, which is deriving from the Torah, again and again, from Torah and from Jewish history, deriving principles of morality which are universal, which is really, he's speaking to the moral nations of the world. Now, of course, there are some corrupt members of mankind, and there are some evil and destructive and anti-Semitic members of mankind. But he felt that there's enough members of mankind in general who are open to hear Torah, that he positioned himself in a place where really, I think, I don't know any other Orthodox rabbi who has put themselves, ever, to my knowledge, in that position. What do I mean by that? Generally speaking, Orthodox rabbanim like myself, we view our job description as teaching Torah to Jews. That we should take the Torah and halacha and hashkafa and medrash and musa, whatever it is, and gather around us an audience of Klal Yisrael and teach to Klal Yisrael Torah, teach Torah to Klal Yisrael. And that is, of course, the mitzvah, b'shinantom levonecha v'dibartobam, the mitzvah of teaching Torah to Klal Yisrael, right? Torah tzivah lanu Moshe morosha kehilas Yaakov, that in some sense the Torah is unique to kehilas Yaakov. It's a morosha kehilas Yaakov. It's not something out there for the whole of mankind. It's morosha kehilas Yaakov. But Rabbi Sachs said that is really only half the story. The other half of the story is that if we can, and throughout most of Jewish history we couldn't, but now maybe we can teach some of our ideas out there into the world of intelligent, moral, thinking non-Jews who want to hear what the Torah has to say about life, about morality, about community, about the future, about all the things that are important to them and to us as human beings. What does the Torah have to say? And in that light, Rabbi Sachs saw himself really as, if you like, an ambassador to the Goyim. In fact, this was one of the criticisms that I heard leveled against him by many of the the leaders of the United Synagogue or the Anglo-Jewish community or the honorary officers, whoever they were, who were really expecting him to be a chief rabbi for the UK and the Commonwealth, which he did, I think, very well, but they felt that he was putting almost all his energies into being an ambassador to the Goyim, that he was giving speeches to the bishops and to the imams and to the government and to the royalty and to the media, and that he saw them as his main audience for his ideas. And of course, he would also give talks within the Jewish community, but that wasn't his high priority. Now, it's not completely true it wasn't his high priority, but it is true that he saw himself as uniquely qualified to address the nations of the nations of the world. And he did so in a most remarkable way. I don't know if any of you ever did any of you ever see his televised or his radio debates with some of the most famous atheists, some of the most militant atheists of the 20th and 21st century? People like Richard Dawkins, who wrote this book of the God Delusion, or Colin Blakemore, who also wrote books about brain neurology, and all of whom are really firmly committed atheists, right? Secularists, atheists, and no one was willing really publicly to take them on and to discuss with them their ideas and how we should relate to them, except for Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. He decided that he could really take them up, and he did so in a most remarkable way. Do you remember Richard Dawkins? Does that mean anything to anybody? Richard Dawkins, this book that he wrote, which sold millions of copies and did unbelievable damage to young students, men and women, boys and girls in the student world for decades, and still to this day. It's called The God Delusion. And the God Delusion, and he writes, I've never ever seen a book in the introduction that is written the way he writes his introduction. He writes his introduction in a blatant militant style. He says, I'm aiming this book at anybody who has within them any slight tendencies to believe in God. And my goal of this book is that if you started off reading the book with a belief in God, by the time you finish this book, it will have been neutralized. You won't anymore have a belief in God. It will be shown to you how ridiculous that belief is, and how damaging it is, and how dangerous it is, and how immoral it is. I mean, his militant attack against Emunah and particularly against Judaism, but against all faiths, was just breathtaking. But somehow in the secular academic world, it was considered to be, it was totally acceptable. On the contrary, he was celebrated as a celebrity in many fields, and he frightened the life out of most people, except he didn't frighten Jonathan Sacks. Jonathan Sacks took him on and debated him. And I remember watching Sacks sort of debate him. And I was thinking to myself, that Sacks was really what's a good word for this? A gladiator. He was a gladiator in the world of ideas. Like, he went in there really fighting, but of course in a very British way, very understated and very modest. But he cut him to pieces. He cut him to pieces in a most gentlemanly and modest and understated way. In fact, I thought he was a bit too gentle with him, really. But that was his British sort of demeanor. But the way he debated Colin Blakemore as well, a famous, not alive anymore, a neuropsychologist, a neurosurgeon, a brain neurosurgeon who wrote a lot of of material about science, and was a very, very fierce enemy of all religions. These people, Jonathan Sacks took on and was willing to publicly confront them and show that for all their arguments, there are counter arguments which are much more powerful than anything they've ever said. So in that sense, Jonathan Sacks in the public arena was a fighter for emunah and for morality, and a representative of Torah on a stage where really, as I say, I know quite a few hundred Orthodox rabbis, English speaking. I don't know anybody else, frankly, who is on that stage, who has taken on that voice to speak in a way which addresses the thinking, moral sense of the non-Jewish world. He also had a very interesting televised discussion with the Dalai Lama. Anybody ever heard of the Dalai Lama? The Dalai Lama is a Buddhist Tibetan monk. He's the sort of the leader of the Tibetan religion as a Tibetan monk, and he's the world leading authority on Buddhism, and Jonathan Sacks had a televised discussion with him, about Buddhism and Judaism, and what is the difference, and what do we have in common, and where do we differ? And I don't think there are many people in the world who know enough about Buddhism and at the same time know Judaism at a sufficient depth to be able to have that discussion, to sit in front of a televised audience and have that debate and discussion. It's probably on YouTube if you're interested to look for it. It's probably available. It was amazing because it was really, in the true sense of the word, it was a Kiddush Hashem. The people who were listening to it heard, maybe for the first time, an intelligent voice explaining to them that the values and the principles on which Judaism is based, and how in certain respects it is on the same page as other religions, and in other respects it's completely different. And it's a very difficult, I've tried to do this a couple of times, after on Buddhism. I don't know if you know this, but in America, there are lots of young people, young Jewish men and women, who are attracted to Buddhism. Buddhism has become a very attractive, and generally speaking, the Far East, the meditations of the Far East and the vocabulary of the Far East religions has become very, very popular in many circles, particularly in America, and even some of the Israeli youth who after the army go to the Far East and are influenced by some of these ideas and writings. So Jonathan Sacks was somebody who was able to sort out the differences and similarities. Why the differences and similarities? Because, coming back to what I said before, he was aware of the fact that within Torah, there is a particular and a universal. There are some aspects of the Torah which are not meant for the nations of the world. They're meant for Klal Yisrael, because Klal Yisrael have a particular journey to make, have got a particular challenge, and in that sense are set apart, right? From the rest of the Jewish people, from the rest of mankind, right? When Moshe Rabbeinu says to Paro, "B'ni b'chori Yisrael," that Klal Yisrael is B'ni b'chori, is my firstborn child. What he's saying is, the whole of mankind are my children. Klal Yisrael are my firstborn in the sense that they're taking a leading role in the spiritual development of mankind. But the whole of mankind's important, right? The principle of Tzelem Elokim, from the very beginning of Bereshit chapter 1, and then again in chapter 2, and then again in chapter 9, the concept of a Tzelem Elokim, that the human being has a divine aspect to him or her, that is a universal principle which applies to all of mankind. The question is how to develop that Tzelem Elokim and how to use it and how to express it. So for that, the Jewish people were given the Torah, we were given we express it in a particular way. But that it applies to everybody, this was something that Rabbi Sachs really was able to explain and understand. I remember him telling me, and I think he's spoken about it in one or two of his speeches, that at the assassination of Rabin, what year was that? I've forgotten what the year was, the assassination of Rabin, in the 1990s, I think it was. So he was, so there was a private jet flying from London to attend the funeral. So he was on that flight as the chief rabbi of England, together with Tony Blair, and I think a previous Prime Minister of England, and also I think Prince Charles. There was a delegation from the UK that went to attend the funeral of Yitzhak Rabin. So he's sitting on this plane, and who is he with? He's with all these people, right? But what's he doing? He's taking out a sefer and he's learning. So Tony Blair, who is a believing Christian and himself knowledgeable in the Bible, said to him, Rabbi Sachs, what are you studying? So he says, well, I'm studying. He told him whatever he was studying. He says, maybe you'd like to share it with us, right? Maybe you'd like to share it with us. So he says, there I was, a mile high up in the sky, together with prime ministers and royalty and one or two others, giving them a Chumash shiur, right, on an aspect of the Chumash. And of course, he does it in a way which is intelligible to them, and he's able to extract from the Chumash the universal ideas that are within the Chumash. Right? And if you read this book that I just showed you, the book Morality, you will see that what he's doing is he is cherry picking, if you like, out of the Torah. He's not teaching them Hilchas Muktzah or Hilchas Tefillah or Hilchas Kriyas Shema. Right? He's not teaching them the laws of Yom Kippur and Bris Milah and of Chometz on Pesach. He's not teaching them that. But because that is the particularist aspect of Torah. But there is also a universal aspect of Torah, which is something that they can understand and that they can benefit from. And the chiddush of Rabbi Sachs was that he believed that in our generation, not only can they understand it, but they are thirsty for it. They're thirsty for it. They want to hear some wisdom because they are being brought up in universities. This was a theme of his whenever he got up to speak to academic audience, that universities today give people skills and information, and they give them knowledge, right? But they don't give them any value. And therefore, he says, you have a situation where, for example, somebody studying science will become very knowledgeable and very well informed about science, but he won't know what to do with his knowledge. Values tell you what's important in life and the way in which you should use, so you could use your scientific knowledge to create an atomic bomb or to create a world pandemic. If you wanted to spread illness, you could use your study of biology to spread illness, or you could spread well-being. But the values tell you what to do with it. Similarly, the Western cultures give you freedom, but don't teach you what to do with your freedom. For that, you need values. And where are you going to find values? Nobody in universities are teaching you any values. In fact, if they try and teach you values, they get very criticized. Who are you to tell me your values? We're not here in university to hear your idea about what's important in this world. We just want to hear texts and skills and give us knowledge in order to be able to be competent in this world. But what's important is, for example, building a family important? Is that a value in life? Why is building a family an important thing in this world, right? And in fact, and we all know that in the Western world today, most of the young people, and no one ever tells them that one of the great goals in life is to build a family. They're never told that, and they're never shown that, and they don't know that. And as a result of which, they don't get married, they don't have children, by and large. and it creates massive demographic and national and social problems, because family life is not really presented as something which is a great goal and a great achievement in life. It's considered to be something that you do, if you like, when you're not busy doing other things which are important, like having a career and making money and traveling the world. That's what's important. But making a family and nurturing a family and looking after the next generation is not one of the values. And this was also something he often spoke about when he spoke to prime ministers. He spoke about the importance to create a system which created incentives for people to get married and have children and build families, because Europe has got this unbelievable demographic problems. I remember, I think I might have mentioned this once before, I don't remember the Shia, but I remember, and every now and again there's a meeting of prime ministers in Europe called, I think, G5 or G6 or something like that, and they discuss problems in Europe. So this was a time of Theresa May was the Prime Minister of England, and they were discussing all the different economic issues, social issues, and the issues of immigrants and economics, etc. One afternoon sessions was all about this issue of demography, that they actually are not producing enough children to replace the people who have died. In other words, they've got all the European nations have a negative birth rate. There are fewer children being born, and children. And I read an article in the Times newspaper about this, and there was a picture of five European prime ministers sitting together having a meeting. Did I mention this in the show? I don't remember. Anyhow, what struck me was this journalist of this particular article obviously had a little bit of wanted to add a little bit of spice to that article. And at the very last paragraph of the article in the newspaper said, I'd like you to have a look at this picture above of the 5 prime ministers who are all in the driving seat leading Europe today. Not one of them has a child. Not one of them. They're all childless prime ministers. Not Theresa May and not Merkel of Germany and not Macron in France and not the guy from Italy and not the guy from Holland. None of these people have any children, not one of them. And there they are, prime ministers of the leading countries in Europe, discussing why is it that we have a negative birth rate in our countries. And this was something that Sachs used to discuss and speak about regularly. And it's got to do with values. It's got to do with having an educational system where people are taught that building a family, particularly young women, are taught that there's a value in building a family, which is maybe more important at some point in your life than having a career and earning a lot of money, being very busy as an architect or as a lawyer. It's more important to build a family, but no one's ever told them that. They've not learned them that. Haven't learned that. And that value is not being promoted within our society. These are issues which Sachs felt very acutely. And he felt that the Torah was able to be a source not only for the particularist issues which are Jewish, but also for the universal issues that the nations of the world, the intelligent non-Jews, would welcome listening to. And this is something which was part of his absolute uniqueness in so many ways. Let me give you one or two interesting examples. There is, first of all, the principle itself is not so easy to find in the Torah. The Torah generally is written in a style that it is Torah Tzibur Lonu Moshe. The Torah is written for us, for the Jewish people. It's the instructions for the Jewish people, right? Nevertheless, in the book of Devarim, you find something very interesting. In the opening psukim of Devarim chapter 1, it says that Moshe Rabbeinu taught the Torah to the Jewish people, right? Here he is in the last 5 weeks of his life. That's Sefer Devarim. And he's teaching Torah, Ba'er Heitev. Those are the 2 words that are used in the Torah. Ba'er, Beis Aleph Resh. It comes from the word Biur. Biur means explanation, right? Understand, right? Ba'er Heitev means well understood. Ba'er Heitev. And then it appears a bit later in Sefer Devarim again. Ba'er Heitev, to learn Torah, Ba'er Heitev. What does Rashi say? Does anybody know what Rashi says on the words Ba'er Heitev? So, Michael Gross, does it ring any bells with you? Sometimes you have a bit of Rashi deeply embedded in your soul. And you have any memories at all? What does Ba'er Heitev mean?
I think it was something to do with the well of knowledge.
Yes, it's a well of knowledge, but Rashi says something very specific. Rashi says, B'shiv'im lashon. That's what Rashi says. Quoting a Gemara. The Gemara says he taught the Torah B'shiv'im lashon, which if you simply translate it, it means in 70 languages. So what does that mean, 70 languages? What are 70 languages? In the ancient world, what were 70 languages? Ancient Canaanite, ancient Egyptian, ancient Akkadian, ancient Hittite. Why would Moshe Rabbeinu teach the Torah in a multilingual way? None of the Jewish people spoke ancient Canaanite or ancient Hittite or ancient Greek or whatever it was. So why would he teach the Torah in lots of different languages? So the Mefarshim say, the Vilna Gaon and others say, clearly it doesn't mean literally in Shivim Lashon. The idea of Shivim Lashon relates to the idea of Shivim Umot HaOlam. There are 70 nations of the world, right? And that is a theme throughout the Torah. And there is Klal Yisrael. And in addition to the Jewish people, there are 70 major nations of the world. So B'shivim Lashon means that Moshe Rabbeinu taught the Jewish people. So this is how Sachs understood it. And this is definitely the right way to understand it. That Moshe Rabbeinu taught the Torah to Klal Yisrael. He taught them both to understand it in Hebrew, specifically the way in which it applies to how a Jew should live a Jewish life, but also he taught it in such a way, B'shivim Lashon means there are messages in the Torah which can be heard by and can benefit all the 70 nations of the world. In other words, the nations of the world can benefit by learning from the Torah ideas of justice, ideas of fairness, ideas of family, ideas of community, ideas of philanthropy, all the major ideas which make a society into an elevated and moral society. All those ideas are in the Torah. And the Torah gives you a value system, right, which can work irrespective of whether you're scientifically knowledgeable or not scientifically knowledgeable. You can be the greatest doctor or scientist or economist or whatever, but what are your values? So your values should come from the Torah. The Torah is not about science, it's about values, right? And that's what Sachs dedicated a whole book to, this idea called the Great Partnership. If you're going to read any single book of Sachs, read the Great Partnership. The Great Partnership. So what is the partnership? The partnership is Torah and science. Torah and science. Because, as he writes, he believes that science tells you how to dominate the world, how to find solutions to illnesses, to famine, how to make life more function better, and how to save lives. Science gives us tremendous tools, but tools can be used for anything. It's Torah that gives us a purpose and a value system, and tells us what to do with our skills, what to do with our power, what to do with our affluence. It's one thing to become rich. Then the question is, what are you supposed to do with your money? Right? He speaks about this quite a few times. Somebody who becomes rich, either an individual or a society or a nation, become rich. And now what? Okay, so science has succeeded, economy has succeeded, and now we're rich. The question is, how to use, what are we supposed to do with this money? Are we just supposed to use it for our own self-indulgence, to become more materialistic and build more luxurious cars and luxurious homes ever more luxurious, or maybe there's a value system out there which can tell us how to use your money in order to achieve certain values and improve the world. That's the Torah. The Torah gives us certain ideas of chesed, ideas of community, ideas of Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael, but not just Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael, for the whole of mankind. So this was really one of the uniqueness of Rabbi Sachs, was his ability to learn in the Torah, to learn a universal message, and to have the language and the courage. I often saw him being in a very modest, understated way. He was very courageous in the way he took on to debate these people, and at the same time remained quite modest. It might sound like a strange thing to say about somebody who became really an international celebrity, but he retained. I remember once at a rabbinic a meeting of rabbis, where Jonathan Sachs was present, and he had just got another great international award of some sort. He was constantly getting awards of one sort or another. He received something called, I think, the Templeton Prize. Is that right? Anybody know anything? There's something called the Templeton Prize. Yes, you know, Shirley knows about it, right? It's worth a lot of money, and it's an international praise of some sort, and he'd received it with great fanfare and great praise internationally. And so somebody asked him at the table, said to him, "Tell me, Rabbi Sachs, how do you manage with all this international accolade and this praise and this international recognition? How do you, doesn't it affect you in any way?" So he said, getting some praise is not a bad thing, but the important thing is, when you get that sort of praise, don't inhale. That's what he said. You're allowed to listen to the praise, but don't inhale. I thought that was quite an interesting one-liner of his. You know, don't inhale means don't take the praise too much to heart, because if you do, you'll become an egomaniac. And that's what happens to most celebrities. Most celebrities, doesn't matter what type of celebrities they are, they get into a state of ego, which makes them impossible people to live with. Right? You can't live with them because they're so sort of obsessed with their own ego and their own fame and their own how wonderful they are, that they've got no another. The hallmark of Torah leaders and Talmidei Chachamim throughout the ages has been, on the one hand, to have great abilities, on the other hand, to have another, to have natural modesty, to realize that any gifts you might have are gifts from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that you have a responsibility to use them in the best way possible, and to be self-critical and not to, in the language of Rabbi Sachs, don't inhale, don't take it too much to heart. And I thought that was just such a wonderful one line. I asked him afterwards about that expression, and I think he said he got it from somewhere. He had this amazing ability to read books, read biographies, and read books of social science and philosophy and psychology and science. And he had this ability which made me unbelievably jealous. And most of the rabbis who knew him were incredibly jealous of him. And he could sit down one afternoon or one evening, block out the whole world. He never had a cell phone. He didn't have anybody beeping him or disturbing him. He would sit down for I don't know, 6, 7, 8, 10 hours straight, and he would read a book, read the most difficult books that had been written about sociology or medicine or science or whatever it is, and he would absorb the book, and that was it. From then on, he could cite, he could quote from the book. He knew exactly when to use it and how to use it, and he just remembered it forever. He had a search machine and a memory. He had a hard disk with a search machine on his head, and he would read a book, and that was it. From then on, he was quoting left, right, and center from all different sources. And this was part of his natural intellectual genius. That was quite remarkable. He He had a special sensitivity in certain areas. One of his areas of sensitivities was for Holocaust victims. And he, whenever possible, he would speak to them, hear their life stories, and whenever possible, he would include some of the life stories of Holocaust victims in his speeches and in his books, because he felt that Holocaust victims who had come out of the Holocaust and had been through absolute hell, right? And they've been through traumas at a level that we can't even, Baruch Hashem, even imagine. They lived through horrific times and had nevertheless somehow managed to come out of it. And in many cases, were still able to lead a life without bitterness, without vengeance, without all the post-traumatic quality, the post-traumatic symptoms that we normally associate with people, and above all, without feeling victimized. They didn't come out with a feeling, oh gosh, we are victims, the world owes us compensation for our suffering. They didn't come out feeling we are the whole victim mentality, which is so toxic, right? And people feel like we are victims, the world owes us everything, and that we're not responsible for anything we do because we are victims, right? The concept of being able to get past victimhood, right, and lead a productive and creative life was something truly. He found that a truly elevating and amazing, and whenever he could cite it, whenever he could connect with it, he did. Also in this book, Morality, he's got here, if you have the book, it's on page 208. He brings a story of somebody called Edith Eger, E-G-E-R. And he speaks about her, and she says victimization comes from the outside, of forces we can't control. But healing comes when we refuse the self-definition of a victim. The self-definition of a victim has got a whole chapter here about victimization and victimhood. And the chapter is called Victimhood. But the way he deals with it and the way he understands it from a point of view, he's not speaking as a psychologist, speaking in terms of what are the values of life and how Holocaust survivors who have gone on to build a beautiful life and a beautiful families and defy the suffering of their early life is something quite breathtaking, right? And this is also something amazing that Rabbi Sachs had, and that he was able to use these ideas in a very powerful way. Maybe I'll just share with you a Dvar Torah of Rabbi Sachs, which I remember, which I don't think he's written down. I don't remember seeing it in any of his writings, about the first pasuk in Lech Lecha with Avraham Avinu. Right? The pasuk says, Lech Lecha me'artzecha mi'moladetecha u'mibeis avicha el ha'oretz asher arek. Right? We looked at that pasuk, I think, in one of our shiurim. Right? Avraham Avinu was told to leave behind his land, his birthplace, his family, and go forth to Eretz Canaan and make it into Eretz Yisrael. This week's parsha is then Chayesara, when Avraham Avinu negotiates and buys the first plot of land in Eretz Canaan, right? So the first plot of land ever that is bought by a Jew in Eretz Canaan is, of course, Hebron, is, of course, the Ma'aras HaMachpelah. He's buying a burial place for Sarah. But the Torah makes a whole chapter in the beginning of Chayesara out of the narrative of how important it was for Avraham Avinu to buy this piece of land, to pay an extortionate amount of money for it. And then the Pasuk says something very interesting. After the transaction, it says, Vayokom Sedei Ephron. Now, the Sedei Ephron, it doesn't just say it was there was a transfer of title, a change of ownership. It was Vayokom. It was elevated, right? This piece of land was elevated by the transaction, and in the sense that it was elevated, it was the first piece of real estate to be transformed from Eretz Canaan into Eretz Yisrael. Right? And Hebron of Oros Machpelah has got a very special history to it, and a very special power to it. It's of course Kivrei Avos, Avram and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov and Leah, and according to the Medrash, also Adam and Chava are buried there. That's not in the Torah anywhere. Medrash say Adam and Chava are also buried there, and in fact the Medrash says that's why the town in general was called Kiryat Arba. The beginning of this week's parsha. What is Kiryat Arba? What is the four? What is the four of Hebron? Are the four couples who are buried there. In the Chumash, there are only 3 couples that are buried there. But the Medrash adds Adam and Chava. Okay, that's a different story completely. Al Kol Panim, Avram Avinu is told to leave behind his land, his birth, the city of his birth, and his family. Why is he told? Why doesn't HaKadosh Baruch Hu simply say to him, Lech lecha, we don't care where you're going from, we care where you're going to. Lech lecha to Eretz Canaan, go there. Why are we told all these 3 different things? So Rabbi Sachs took this pasuk and he transformed it into something truly amazing. And he said that in the history of ideas, the world history of ideas, he took this pasuk into the world, into the universal world of ideas, right? And he said, Judaism believes in the power of an idea, right? He used to say, he had some very, very powerful one-liners. He said, the non-Jewish world believes in the idea of power. If you read non-Jewish history, what they're interested in is armies and wealth and political power, military power, economic power. They believe that those powers shape the world. The Torah believes not in the idea of power, but in the power of an idea. And the ideas, he says, Avraham Avinu didn't have any wealth, he didn't have any army, he didn't have any economic, military, or national power at all, but he had an idea. What was his idea? He had 2 ideas. Avraham Avinu changed the world with 2 ideas. One idea was emunah, a belief in God the Creator, and the second was a belief in chesed, right? That our role in life, everybody's role in life is to maximize the amount of chesed they do to other people. These 2 ideas, that was Avraham Avinu, right? Emunah and chesed. And with these ideas, he changed the world. But coming back to this pasuk just for 1 minute, I know it's the last 5 minutes of the Shia, I can't possibly do justice to a Devar Torah, which really should take an hour to say it over, but I'm just going to give you a sketch of one of his Divrei Torah. There's one of the great ideas of Judaism is freedom of choice, that the human being has bechira chofshit. Right? The Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva dedicates 2 chapters 4 and 5 and 6, to the whole idea of bechira chofshit, that we have a freedom of choice. We can choose what we want to be, who we want to be, what path to follow. We have that freedom of choice, right? We don't have the freedom of choice to choose. I can't choose to be 6'5". I can't choose to be something I'm not. But within the given of what I am, I can choose how to live my life. And that is bechira chofshit. We are not subject to what is called a determinist way of thinking. The non-Jewish world systematically has always produced determinists. The great thinkers in the non-Jewish world have all come to the conclusion that human freedom of choice is an illusion. We're not free at all to choose, right? If you read, one of the people I mentioned earlier, this fellow Colin Blakemore, one of the people Sachs debated on BBC, he was a great neurosurgeon and a great scientist and medical man, and he was a firm believer that actually all the choices that we make, which we think we're making free choices, are really all pre-programmed within us. If you understand all the genetics of the human being, all his brain chemistry and everything, you could predict every single action that a person makes, and there is no freedom of choice. But the Torah tells us there is. Because if there is no freedom of choice, the whole idea of a mitzvah and an aveira and the whole idea of avodat Hashem, of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu and a tzaddik and a rasha, all doesn't make sense at all. Because if there's no freedom of choice, then we are not liable for anything that we do. All the things we're doing, we're simply doing as victims of forces beyond our control. Very briefly, Sachs gave a whole talk saying that there are three main theories of determinism. One of them is like what is generally referred to as a Marxist determinism, which speaks about economic forces. If you could maybe, Dina, if you don't mind muting everybody again, I'm getting quite a bit of background noises from somewhere. Just mute everybody. Do you know how to do that? Thank you. You can still hear me, right? You can hear me. Good. So he said, Avraham Avinu was told, Lech lecha me'artzecha, moladtecha, mibeis avicha. Says Rabbi Sachs, these are three different expressions of determinism. Artzecha is a determinism, your land, which is which is wealth and economy and the economic forces that Marx says controls our life. We don't have any free choice because we're all controlled by economic forces. And then there is Moladetecha, which is your society. There are other forces which say we are controlled simply by social norms and we behave in a way which is all our behavior. We can't choose how to behave because we're locked into a society and that has filtered through into our mind and that's how we're forced to behave. We are the victims of society, right? And then Beis Avicha is your family. That there is a theory, right, that you are, like Colin Blakemore would say, that we are who we are, we make the decisions we make simply because we are the children of our parents and we have their genetics, we have our early childhood experiences, we have a certain type of brain chemistry we've inherited from them, and that's who we are. Therefore, and the therefore is important. And therefore, these are three theories of determinism which deny the idea of Bechira Chofshis. And if there's no Bechira Chofshis, the whole of morality is undermined. If there's no freedom of choice, right? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying to Avraham Avinu, leave behind all ideas of determinism and make a choice. Choose to do something which is against your society, against the land of your birth, against all economic logic, against all the social forces, against your family, everything. Go against that. The Lech Lecha was the first of the 10 Nisyonot, but above all, it was Avraham Avinu exercising his Bechira Chofshis, his freedom of choice, to transcend all these ideas of determinism. But look what's happened here. Maybe I haven't explained it well enough, but Rabbi Sachs was able to take the first positive of Lech Lecha and suddenly transform it into a seminar on freedom of choice against determinism. And that is a universal theme. That's not something which is unique. It's not particular to Judaism. It's, of course, also important for Judaism, but for the whole of morality, for the whole of mankind, to appreciate what it means to exercise freedom of choice and how to nurture the freedom of choice among individuals and educationally. All that is an extremely important principle. Anyhow, ladies and gentlemen, I have not in the least bit done justice to a person who was a most remarkable, unique individual who has left a lasting impact on me, on the Jewish world, and on the thinking world beyond Judaism. And we miss him greatly. And to the best of my knowledge, nobody has really stepped up to do what he was doing, in that sense, to be a voice on the world stage. And he's Zichrei Baruch, his memory should be a blessing, please God, for all of us. And yesterday was his Yartzeit, the second Yartzeit, the 20th of Cheshvan was yesterday. And we will always remember him as a particularly precious leader within Klal Yisrael. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. That's it for today. A little bit of a different shir to normally, without Chumash texts and Rishonim and Achronim. I just wanted to share with you something which is particularly precious to me. Thank you, Dina.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Kimche. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Nice to see
Rabbi. Shkoyach.